Before anything appeared online, before the title was written, before people started arguing about what really happened, there was a workshop, not a headline, not a controversy, not a viral moment, just a physical space where machines worth more than most homes are treated with precision, patience, and full attention. And inside that space was one of the most extreme creations in modern automotive engineering, a Bugatti valued at around $6 million. A machine so rare that even seeing it in person feels unreal. And working around it was Mat Armstrong, a creator known for taking damaged, complex, and often impossible automotive projects and rebuilding them step by step. But nothing about this environment is ever simple. Because when you work at this level, every movement matters more than it looks. Every step has weight. Every action carries consequence. And every second is part of a system that demands control. But control is never absolute. It only exists until something unpredictable interrupts it. And that is exactly where the story begins. Not with destruction, not with drama, but with routine. A normal working moment inside a high-pressure environment where focus is split between multiple tasks, tools, parts, and constant decision-making. Everything looks stable from the outside, but stability in a workshop like this is always temporary. Because even when everything feels familiar, the margin for error is still almost invisible. A small shift in position, a brief movement that no one would normally notice, a moment where attention is divided just enough for reality to move faster than awareness. And in that fraction of time, something happened. The Bugatti Windshield, one of the most delicate and expensive parts of the entire vehicle, became involved in an incident that no one planned. There was no warning, no build-up, no dramatic signal that something was about to change. Just impact. And then silence. That kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy. Because everyone in that space understands what silence like that means. It means something just crossed from perfect condition into damage. And in a world where value is measured in millions, that shift is not small. It is immediate. It is irreversible in that moment. And it is understood instantly by everyone present. But what the internet sees later is never the same as what happens in real time. Online, it becomes a headline, a short clip, a sentence designed to trigger reaction. Mat Armstrong damaged a $6 million Bugatti windshield. But inside the workshop, there is no headline. There is no audience. There is only the reality of what just occurred. And reality does not compress itself into simple explanations. It unfolds slowly. First comes recognition. Then comes confirmation. Then comes a weight of understanding what the situation actually involves. Because when a vehicle like a Bugatti is involved, nothing exists in isolation. Every component is part of a system designed at the highest level of engineering. Every part has value not just financially, but structurally and historically. And when something goes wrong, it is never just a part. It becomes a moment that requires assessment, clarity, and responsibility. In environments like this, experience does not eliminate risk. It only improves awareness of how quickly things can change. And even awareness cannot stop time. It can only react to it. What makes moments like this spread so fast online is not just a car. It is a contrast, a machine built for perfection, and a moment defined by imperfection. That contrast creates shock, and shock spreads faster than context ever can. But inside the workshop, time continues differently. There is no replay button, no slow motion analysis, only immediate understanding of what must be done next. Because in real-world engineering environments, especially at this level, stopping is not an option. Work does not pause for emotion. It shifts into response. Damage is evaluated. Conditions are checked. Next steps are considered. Not for content, not for audience reaction, but for the reality in front of them. And that reality is always more complex than what a short clip can show. Because what the internet often misses is everything that came before the moment. The hours of preparation, the constant adjustments, the physical interaction required when working on high-value machines that cannot simply be treated like static objects. At this level, everything is hands-on, everything is real, and everything carries risk. Even when everything is done correctly, that is the part most people never see. Not because it is hidden, but because it happens in real time, inside environments that do not stop for documentation. And when something unexpected happens in that flow, It becomes part of the process, not separate from it. As the situation settles, what remains is not chaos, but awareness. Awareness that even in the most controlled environments in the world, unpredictability still exists. That engineering precision reduces risk, but never removes it completely. And that human interaction, no matter how skilled, always carries variables that cannot be fully eliminated. This is where the real story exists, not in the damage itself, but in what it represents. A reminder that perfection in machinery does not eliminate imperfection in reality, and that even the most advanced systems in the world still operate within human limits. As time moves forward, the intensity of the moment fades outside the workshop. Online discussions will continue, opinions will form, narratives will spread, but inside the reality where it happened, the moment becomes something else entirely. Not drama, not controversy, but experience. Something that stays behind after everything else moves on. Because in environments like this, every incident, expected or not, becomes part of learning, part of process, part of understanding how fragile precision can be when it meets physical reality. And when everything is finally quiet again, when tools are set down, when focus shifts forward, what remains is a simple truth that applies far beyond this moment. Even in a world built on engineering perfection, 1 second is always enough to change everything. And even after the immediate moment passes, the real weight of it doesn't disappear. It settles, slowly, quietly, like dust after impact. Inside the workshop, no one is reacting for the sake of reaction. There is no dramatic movement, no exaggerated response, no chaos like people imagine from the outside. Instead, there is something far more controlled. Focus. Because when you work around machines like this, emotional reaction is never the first step. Understanding is. And understanding takes time. Every detail is reviewed in silence. Every angle of what just happened is mentally reconstructed. Not for storytelling, but for clarity. Because in environments like this, guessing is not acceptable. Only certainty matters. And certainty only comes after observation. The Bugatti remains still, immovable, silent, but its presence in the room feels different now. Not because it has changed physically in a way the eye can fully process, but because perception has shifted. That is something most people never understand about high-value engineering environments. Objects do not just exist as physical machines. They exist as responsibility. And when something happens to that responsibility, even slightly, the entire atmosphere of the space changes. Not loudly, but internally, like a switch that no one announces. Mat Armstrong continues working, but the rhythm of the environment has already adjusted. Not stopped, not broken, adjusted. Because in real-world automotive work, especially at this level, stopping entirely is rarely an option. There are processes that must continue. There are assessments that must be completed. There are decisions that cannot wait for emotion to settle. And that is where experience becomes more important than reaction. Because experience teaches something that cannot be learned from theory alone. How to continue when something unexpected happens. How to separate emotion from evaluation. How to move forward without ignoring reality. And that balance is what defines professionals in high-pressure engineering environments. But outside that space, the world is already reacting differently. Because online perception does not wait for process. It waits for outcome. A clip appears. A title spreads. A number becomes the center of attention. $6 million. That figure alone changes the way the story is perceived. Because human psychology reacts faster to value than to context. But value, in reality, is only one part of the equation. Inside the workshop, value is not abstract. It is physical. It is structural. It is tied to material, engineering, rarity, and design. And when something happens to a machine at this level, the response is never based on shock. It is based on understanding impact. What is affected? What is still intact? What can be repaired? What requires replacement? What does this mean for the system as a whole? These are the questions that define the next stage. Not speculation, not assumption, but structured evaluation. Because in high-end automotive engineering, especially with hypercars like Bugatti, nothing exists in isolation. Every component interacts with another. Every part is part of a larger system. And when one element is affected, the entire structure must be considered carefully. That is why the real story is never in the moment itself. It is in what follows. And what follows is rarely visible to the audience watching from the outside, because viewers see a highlight, but professionals see a process. And processes take time. Time that is never shown in short clips. Time that exists between reaction and resolution. And during that time, something important happens internally within any technical environment. Perspective shifts. Because incidents like this force recalibration, not just of the situation, but of attention, of movement, of awareness. Every action after that moment becomes slightly more deliberate, not out of fear, but out of precision. Because once you experience unpredictability in a controlled environment, even briefly, it changes how you interact with everything that follows. That is a silent impact most people never see. Not the damage itself, but the adjustment it creates. Meanwhile, outside the workshop, the story continues to evolve in a completely different direction. People debate intent. People analyze responsibility. People react to fragments of information without ever seeing the full environment. But that is the nature of modern digital storytelling. It compresses complexity into simplicity. It turns process into moment, and it turns moment into narrative. But inside reality, nothing is compressed. Everything is continuous. And that continuity is what defines real engineering environments. Because machines do not understand narrative. They only respond to physics. And physics is always consistent, no matter who is involved, no matter what the value is, no matter how complex the situation becomes. As time continues, the initial intensity of the moment begins to fade internally within the workspace, not because it is forgotten, but because it is integrated into the process. Evaluations are completed, observations are recorded mentally, next steps are clarified, and attention slowly returns to forward movement. Because that is how real-world technical environments survive unpredictability. They do not freeze around it. They adapt through it. And adaptation is built on experience, not reaction. Mat Armstrong's work has always existed in that space between challenge and execution, between restoration and uncertainty, between control and unpredictability. And incidents like this, regardless of how they are perceived externally, become part of that ongoing reality, not as defining moments, but as contributing ones. Because every project in this field carries moments that were not planned. Every build includes variables that cannot be predicted. And every hands-on interaction with complex machinery carries the possibility of unexpected outcome. That is not failure. That is reality. And reality is not designed for perfection. It is designed for progression. As the workshop continues its workflow, the Bugatti remains a silent reminder of that truth, not as a symbol of mistake, not as a symbol of controversy, but as a symbol of how quickly conditions can change when precision meets physical interaction. And as the day moves forward, what remains is not the incident itself, but the understanding it leaves behind, that no matter how advanced engineering becomes, no matter how controlled environments are designed to be, and no matter how experienced the people involved are, there will always be a fraction of a second where unpredictability can enter the system. And when it does, everything shifts, not because control is absent, but because reality is always active. And in that reality, one moment is always enough to redefine everything that follows. Inside the workshop, the moment doesn't explode into chaos. It settles into silence, a silence that feels heavier than sound, because everyone in the room understands what just changed. Not emotionally, practically. A machine worth millions is no longer in the same condition it was seconds before. And in environments like this, that fact alone is enough to shift everything. There is no shouting, no panic, only awareness. Because high-level automotive work does not allow emotional reactions to lead the process. It demands structure, even in unexpected situations. Mat Armstrong continues the process, but the atmosphere has already shifted. Not broken, just different. More focused, more careful. Because once something unexpected happens around a machine like this, every movement that follows becomes more intentional. Not slower out of fear, but sharper out of understanding. Outside the workshop, the story is already changing shape. Online, it becomes simplified. A headline, a number, a reaction. But inside, there is no simplification. only reality in full detail. And reality is never clean. It is layered, complex, and always dependent on context that most people never see. That is where the gap begins, between what happens and what is shown, between process and perception, because viewers see a moment, but inside the workshop they are living a sequence, and sequences cannot be compressed without losing meaning. As time passes, the initial intensity fades, but the awareness remains, not as tension, but as memory, a reminder that even in controlled environments, unpredictability still exists. Even in precision-based engineering, human interaction introduces variables that cannot be fully removed. And even with experience, focus, and preparation, 1 second is still enough to change direction. Not everything is defined by what went wrong, but by how quickly reality demands response afterward. And in that space, between action and understanding, that is where real experience is built, not in perfection, but in what happens after imperfection appears.